Hello, welcome to another installation of TechTalk. Boys are back at this Friday. Mike, why don't you introduce our special guest today?
So this is one that's been on the calendar for a while. I've been looking forward to this one. We've got Gary from Slip Testing Australia. Now we know Gary's a very, very busy man, so it's fantastic to have him on. Yeah, so let's. I think we've got plenty of questions we want to ask and that sort of thing. I thought I might kick off and start things off. I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask Gary was just for how long has slip compliance been something that's been a requirement out on site there?
Well, in Australia, it's been present since the late 1990s, but it did originate in the UK back in the 50s. It was used to monitor and record basically bitumen roads on corners for road traffic and all that sort of thing. So that's where it originated, and it was adapted to floor testing back in the 70s. So it has come a long way. It got serious in Australia in the late 90s when it referenced the Australian standards, and it has become more awareness around it since then, and it's starting to really become relevant now in a lot of areas. So it's it has come a long way.
Right.
I guess that leads us into the next question I wanted to ask is why are we seeing it that it's becoming more prevalent in the construction or in existing facilities today?
To simplify it, back in the late 80s, early 90s, if somebody fell over or had a trip or a fall, you'd just say, "You silly bugger, get up, what did you do that for?" But now society's changed a little bit, and we're a blame society. So everyone's pointing the finger at somebody else and blaming somebody else. So there's more compliance around it, there's more awareness, and there's a lot more education. So it was very reactive years ago, but now people are becoming very proactive and implementing it in building management programs, retail sites, commercial sites, all that sort of thing. So it's people are becoming more educated around this and aware of it.
Absolutely. As you're aware, Gary, we work heavily in the concrete grinding and polishing industry, and we quite often get asked a lot of questions around the different types of ratings. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yep. So the best analogy I could use is probably everyone at some stage in their life has used sandpaper. You're probably aware of the ratings P1 to P5. So the P represents pendulum, which is sitting behind you. That's the biggest pendulum I've ever seen in my life. Has that been calibrated by any chance? I'm not sure. But the best analogy I could use, a P1 is a smoother finish, which is probably a real smooth wet and dry sandpaper. A P5 is probably like a very aggressive sandpaper. So another analogy I like to use, in your bathroom at home, or if you go to a retail site or anything like that, the floor surface in a wet area needs to be a P3, which is probably a medium sandpaper. So that gives everyone an idea. It's a simple analogy that I use a lot of the time to give people an idea of the variations between P1 and P5. With polished concretes, a lot of them that I've tested, and I've tested a lot over the years, they normally get a classification P1 to P2. I've seen a P3 a couple of times, which I don't like to mention because I know it's a tricky area, and people probably like to keep that to themselves. But I have seen a P3, and it is achievable. But also the negative of that is you probably find a lot of your clients want the shiny finish, the glossy finish, ease of maintenance, all that sort of thing. If you want a P3, that deteriorates, so it becomes sort of a home finish. Mm-hmm. So it's so they're the ratings, pretty much the wet pendulum test.
Yeah. So it's obviously quite a small variation in finish to the level you're gonna get, right?
Correct. Yeah, it can be a minor adjustment that could affect it greatly.
Wow.
So we get a lot of customers, a lot of contractors calling head office here or to us individually, and the question that they have is, look, I've got this specification that's come out now, and for what they're asking me to do and what they're requesting from a P rating or an R rating is they don't seem to marry up at all. And two questions that I think I've got is basically, what's the difference between the P and the R ratings? And who is establishing the rating in a particular zone that's getting into the specification?
Okay, first one I'll answer is the ratings. So they are written in the Australian standards. So the pendulum behind the guys, you can probably see the numbers on the side of the pendulum. So different areas need to be within different ranges of those numbers. The P and R are, okay, so the P represents pendulum. So the advantage of the pendulum is it can be taken on site, it's mobile. It can be used anywhere at any time. An R rating is a ramp test, so that's a lab situation. So it probably wouldn't be relevant for concrete grinding because you need to prepare a sample, take it to a lab and have it ramp tested. So it's basically somebody standing on a flat piece of, say, tile, and then it's basically lifted. And it's hydraulic ramp, and they record when they lose their footing and traction on the product. So, for example, as I said before, bathrooms need to be a P3. You might hear a lot, say, in your scopes for your works, a surveyor might say, oh, we need a P3 or an R10. So they basically correlate each other. So, for example, a surveyor might say, we need an R10 on this tile. I can test it on my pendulum and it can attain a P3, and they're happy to accept that a lot of the time. Okay. So the advantage of the pendulum is it can be taken anywhere at any time and basically do on-site testing of a product that's laid.
And which out of the two is more accurate, Gary?
They're both accurate, and what I was going to touch on later on, just an architect feedback and advice for facilities managers. Our lab is NATA accredited, so I'd probably advise, and I'll just touch on it briefly. I would ensure anybody that's engaged to do this kind of work is NATA accredited. We've got internal processes that allow our machines to be accurate. For example, like your machine behind you, my machine is calibrated externally by a third-party NATA certified lab every 2 years, and internally with my own calibration properties that I have to do for my compliance every 6 months. So that's getting very strict. I've actually got a control tile in my lab at the office. If I have any issues with my pendulum, I can swing away on this control tile and know what the result will be and should be before I even start swinging on it. If there's a variance there, I know there's something wrong with my machine.
So it's like a calibration.
Yeah. So it's basically there's a calibration that's ongoing, and it's performed 6 monthly internally, externally every 2 years, and we need to keep records of that. So anybody that isn't a NATA accredited lab that has a machine, there's no provision for them to do any of these calibrations in-house or externally. So there can be no confidence that their results are actually accurate.
Gary, can I just ask a question that relates to what Josh just asked before? And so there's a couple of things here. Obviously, from my understanding, the pendulum is for wet slip tests. Is that correct?
Yep, correct. Yep.
So there's also a dry slip standard. Okay.
Yep.
And then, of course, like Josh mentioned, there's P ratings, R ratings, and so forth. So I'm gathering from in your line of work, you would probably get a bit of this as well, which is what Josh was sort of getting to before as well. But someone comes forward with some kind of requirement, but you understanding that there's different ratings, whether it be wet, dry, different P and R and so forth, you're basically saying, okay, there's a question here about slip, but these people clearly don't really understand this whole space. Okay. So what are the sorts of conversations or questions that you would be asking whoever's coming to you with these questions to sort of clarify what exactly that they're trying to establish when it comes to their flaws and the slip side of things?
I had one recently where a sports court manufacturer wanted a BPN, which is basically an overall number for sports courts. The number was actually, they wanted a higher number, maintained at a higher BPN than initial certification. So they wanted a 55 BPN at the start, and then they wanted to meet a 75 BPN after that. which wasn't correct. So we actually went back to them and said, have you got that round the wrong way? Is that supposed to be the other way? Certified at 75, maintained at 55. And after some consideration, they did say, yeah, we got that wrong. It's a Pandora's box. I mean, how far do you go? I mean, half the time I've had people call me up, say, I've got Uncle Luigi who lives on the coast of Italy, sent me a shipment of tiles in a shipping container. They come with the European certification. We want to put them in the bathroom, or we have laid them in the bathroom. The surveyors come in and said, we need to get them slip tested. And I go in there and they might be a P1. It's a Pandora's box. You just need to basically, the advice I give people is if you're unsure, don't go ahead, get a sample tested beforehand. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to do things.
Yeah.
I mean, mm-hmm. I've got a job that I need to do tomorrow for a property developer here in Melbourne. The building's not occupied yet. They've had a few people through the foyer and car park areas that have tripped already. So going to take care of that for them later today, just to sort that out.
Yeah, I just had a question. Obviously, we come from the polished concrete industry, and that our contractors tend to turn around floors pretty fast. When do you actually require slip tests to be done? Is it for every project that you do, whether it be domestic or commercial? And when is the best time to do one? Is it straight as you finish, 2 weeks later, at handover? When would you say?
As soon as the project's finished, prior to handover. I mean, there's two standards that we test to. So the Australian standard 4586 is for new surfaces. That's before the general public gets access and has walked on that floor. After that, it reverts to AS 4663 for an existing surface. So if it's a certification of a product or a floor, it needs to be under 4586 for a new surface. And you will find a scope of works will normally reference that. The general line in a scope will say NATA accredited lab is required to test this surface to AS 4586.
Yeah.
And it'll have in brackets new. So it's fairly simple what they require.
So I guess one that mostly comes to mind, and I get this asked quite often, is I have a customer. He is looking to install, let's say it's a pool surround, and they require a particular P rating. And he says, I've got this product and the manufacturer says it's going to give me P3.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a thing that a sealer can just give you a particular rating, or is there that can influence that?
They will do it. They will do it, and they will try. It comes down to the surveyor again. I've had private residents call me up and say they've had some tiles laid by the pool and they've put a sealer on them. The surveyor wants me to do a slip test. And I'll be honest with them. So look, I can come out and do it, but the product you've applied, if you can, I mean, everyone's got Google these days. If you can Google it and get a data sheet on it that specifies it meets a P3 requirement, your surveyor should accept that. And it's down to the surveyor. And the surveyors they've had a hard time over the years, put it that way. So, yeah, whether they'll do it or not, it's up to them. Mm-hmm. But that's what I always tell people. They'll try and do it. I mean, I like I said before, I have numerous building companies call me up that miraculously get these shipments of tiles from overseas and lay 100 square metres of it and think, oh, yeah, it looks fantastic. And the surveyor said it needs to be tested. And they've got a European standard certification that says it's a P3. And I tested it, it might be a P2. And I was like, well, what do we do? I go, you might have to top coat it or put something over the top of it to attain a P3. So there's always ways around it. A lot of my clients these days are older buildings too, that back in the 80s and some go back to the 70s, even before that, were written a bit in the day, and now they're deemed non-compliant. So there's ways around it. There's always ways things can be rectified.
Yeah. I guess that leads me into my next question. And when we're talking about non-compliant, what is the consequences of non-compliant, Gary?
It depends on the situation. Every situation is different. I've recently gone through my NATA reaccreditation, and I had the privilege of having the gentleman who actually wrote the Australian standard do my technical assessment. So during the course of the day, we had quite a bit of dialogue. It was interesting. And I'll touch on it again. If you engage a NATA accredited lab, and the worst case scenario eventuated where something got legal, a NATA accredited lab will be able to support you if it got nasty.
Okay.
And by that I mean we've got processes in place internally. Our rubber sliders, we have a register of when they are used, when they are bought online, when they are out of date and taken out of service. All our machinery, all our pendulum machine, our tortoise machine, my spirit level even, my digital level is calibrated. I purchased it with the calibration certificate. They wouldn't accept that, so I had to go to a third-party NATA accredited lab to have my level calibrated. And I did hear some stories from this gentleman recently about legal consequences for slip testing, and non-NATA accredited labs just did not last 2 minutes in a court. So, yeah, you can be safe in your knowledge that a NATA accredited lab, once they're engaged, can tick all the boxes and it won't fall back on you. And if it did get nasty and did go down that legal route, well, we've got everything in place to tick all the boxes and minimise what could occur.
Wow. Very, very interesting.
Wow. I'm looking forward to getting my bubble calibrated. Just to be sure now that I'm all worried.
No, you're fine.
I knew that painting on the wall wasn't just right.
No, that's it.
I found it interesting before that Gary even said about doing a sample. We are big fans of samples. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I can get back to my lab after a day doing on-site testing out in the field, and I just have tiles miraculously appear on my doorstep for some reason. It just happens. They just turn up, and then no contact number or anything like that, and then you'll get a phone call or an email saying, "No, I've just dropped off 10 samples. You know, they're from overseas. We want to put them in a bathroom," and you look at them, and it's like, well, there's a bit of a gloss finish to those. They're not suitable for a bathroom. And you just let them test them, let them know, and that's it. So
that's a beautiful wall tile.
Yeah, fantastic wall tile. I did do a job recently. It was a penthouse apartment, and they wanted the bathrooms tested, and they had high gloss white tiles in the shower, and they attained a P1, and the project manager just lost it. And I said, well, they're not suitable. I said, he said, what do I do? I said, well, if they want them there, just get them to sign off. They understand they're non-compliant, they're high risk, and cover yourself, because that's all you can do. They've been laid, crowded in, they're ready to go. So they're not going anywhere. So it's just little things like that. It's all about education and covering yourself just in case there is an issue down the track.
How does that work, Gary? I mean, someone's, they're building their dream home, and, the builder said, go down to such and such tile shop. I've got an account down there. Pick out what you want on your bathroom floor, and they pick out some polished porcelain tile or something like that. And are you saying it's if the surveyor comes along during that construction phase and says, hey, in a residential environment those aren't going to pass the P3 standard or the rating, is that going to be a problem in that construction process, or is it not so much of an issue in a private residential environment?
Everyone's different. Depends on the surveyor. But I always tell people, make sure you get something in writing, get it documented that it's not suitable, so there isn't anything down the track that basically they become aware of. So just knock it in the bud straight away. Get it signed off. So get it tested. Say, right, this is the test result. This is what we require. You want this for cosmetic reasons because you're happy with the look. We're telling you it's unsuitable. Just get it documented that you've told them that it's not suitable, but they want it.
So that's an important conversation for our customers to have with builders and so forth when they're going into residential environments, is even though I'm assuming it's on the builder at the end of the day because they're the one holding the contract for the building, it's still something for them to flag as a subcontractor.
Absolutely.
That, as part of their contractual discussions and so forth, just to bring that on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't seen any polished concrete bathrooms yet, and I hope there isn't too many out there.
With that rare P finish, P3.
A P1 finish. Yeah, that'd be a good look.
Yeah. Well, I've got another question for you, Gary. So I've been in the industry for about 4 years, and in the 4 years of my personal experience in concrete grinding, polishing, and the customers that we deal with on a daily basis, and they quite often call up, "Hey Dan, can you give me some specifications on what tool I need to use to achieve a P1, 3, you name it, doesn't matter which number it is. They want to hit a particular level." What's the best way for a concrete grinder polisher to educate themselves on the ratings and things? Where can they find this type of information?
I've got something I could send. It'll probably be, I could send it to you and you could probably forward it on to any of your contractors. It'll probably be a handy addition to their kit bag. And similar to what I said before, if you use that analogy around the sandpaper, that would probably be the best, the most suitable analogy. It's very simple. People understand. Everyone's, dealt or worked with sandpaper at some stage in their life. So that's what I normally use.
Yeah.
But to have some literature to be able to forward on, I think would be very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just one question. Have you covered already what are some of the more difficult surfaces to test or pass? Have you ticked that one off, or could be?
I won't say I hate them with a passion. Hazard tactiles. I do hazard tactiles quite a bit. There's some cheap ones and there's some really good products out there, but they are just fiddly to test because the slider needs to enter at a certain area and exit at a certain area. And plus you've got the raised dimple itself, and everyone's got their own interpretation, and there's a lot of people out there that are making up their own tactile finishes. So yeah, tactiles are the ones that I don't look forward to. I did a job recently for a city council over the west of Melbourne. I did all their hazard and directional tactiles at all their intersections. It was hard enough to do the tactiles, but when you put a gradient of about 3.5 degrees in the mix as well, it makes it even more difficult. So I was glad to see the end of that job, let me tell you.
Wow.
Also epoxies. So epoxies are quite relevant now. There's a lot of epoxies. There's a lot of very cheap epoxies around there that tend to break down quite easily. So there's a lot of them are very good. The good ones are good and the bad ones are really bad, really bad. So they are difficult to get a pass rate on, some of the cheaper epoxies.
Right. And why do you think that is, Gary?
I think it's just the way it's laid, the preparation. I've seen some really bad ones. So I think it just comes to the user error, let's say.
Okay. Basically installment of the product.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Gary, I just wanted to circle back to something that you were getting at earlier in regards to the, I think it was the sporting surface.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they had an installation target and then an ongoing target post-installation. When it comes to contractors having to install a P3 finish in on a particular site, how long does it need to remain compliant for? And how long would the contractor be liable for, or are they liable for a certain period of time after installation?
Every site's different. Just say, for example, it's a job. This is a job I did the other day. It was for a takeaway food franchise. So they have had issues in all their restaurants around Victoria in the kitchen areas. So a contractor that I do a little bit of work with went in to do a chemical etch on these tiles. I was engaged to do a slip test on the tiles. They failed. He called me up and he said, "Why have they failed?" I said, "Well, two reasons." I said, "The day that you did the etch, I needed to be there to test them straight away." I said, "Since then, the staff in the restaurant have got a single mop in the back of house area and they are mopping up grease and grime and all sorts of things and just spreading it across the floor." So, it doesn't last. I mean, if you get it certified to meet a P3 and you get that NADA certificate to say you've met the P3 requirement, what your customer does after that, I mean, everything, it comes down to a contamination, cleaning regime. I mean, it can deteriorate overnight. For example, if you polish a concrete up and you attain a P3 for a polished concrete, you hand over the site and the next day a cleaner by accident puts acidic toilet cleaner in a floor scrubbing machine, it won't be a P3. So yeah, it all comes down to you've done your part up to a certain extent, and then after that, once you hand it over, it's your client's responsibility. You'd make recommendations around cleaning, I would imagine, with your concretes. So after that, they need to do the right thing, but people don't. They don't.
I know. I know. I do a bit of a test and tagging, and when I did the course, that if I test and tag a particular item, as soon as that item is no longer in my vision, I'm no longer liable for that, because those things can happen. You're over a long term, so you can only test then and there, can't you? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was shocked the other day. I went into this restaurant and I spoke to the manager and I said, "Look, what's your cleaning regime?" And he said, "Oh, that's the mop there. We give the floor a mop and a scrub when we leave each night." I'm like, "Well," and these guys had oil and acid resistant footwear on and they were still sliding, and I was shocked. Yeah, it was frightening.
From a facility management perspective then, Gary, when the facility was handed over, it was P3. Now what is the responsibility of the facility manager ongoing?
Well, every site's different. For retail sites, for example, major shopping centres, they will have it written into their insurance documentation, their insurance policy. They need to have a program in place. I've got centres that I do that test quarterly. I've got some that do 6 monthly. I've got some that do annually. It just depends what's written into their contract, pretty much. But majority of retail sites are very big on it. Commercial buildings are starting to come around, especially their entry foyers. That's where their foot traffic is. So they are starting to get on board with it all and becoming more aware of it. Yeah, every site's different.
I suppose coming to a bit of an end of the question time, I just wanted to ask, I'm sure there's probably a list a mile long, but what are a couple of really sort of core pieces of advice that you could give to people, as far as, contractors, architects? Josh mentioned facility managers. What's probably a couple of core bits of advice you'd put out there?
Ask for advice. I mean, my business, I'm happy to talk to anybody and everybody. If you are not sure, and I'm happy for you guys to pass on my number, my contact details. Advice is free. Happy to talk to anybody about anything. If they need any advice or direction, that's fine. But I will reiterate again, the NATA side of things, make sure you engage a NATA accredited test facility. I can't preface that enough. It's very important. Absolutely important.
That they exist, non-accredited testing facilities.
Yeah, there is a lot of non-certified testing facilities out there. So, for example, our sliders have a lifespan. They can only be used for a certain period. These guys reference the Australian standard with the issuing of their test reports. And I can tell you now, they would not even have a copy of the standard. So it's, there's a lot of boxes that we tick internally to ensure that our machinery is accurate. And the last accreditation process I went through, we have to do proficiency testing. So what that entails is we do testing of products with another lab. So we test the same tiles and we basically share the information. So if there's a variation in a certain BPM point number, we know that there's something wrong. So if just recently I had someone had a machine and he wanted to test it. I gave him a tile, he tested it, he came back to me with the results, and the results matched mine.
Right.
So his machine is accurate and mine's accurate.
For the moment.
Yeah. So we know we're both on the same page. So just little things like that. So with NATA accredited facility, you can be guaranteed the results are accurate, and there is processes in place to back that up.
That's great. That's really good advice, Gary. Because obviously the difficulty, because we get asked, hey, can you sell us a tool that is going to give us, let's say, P3? Right. Let's say we had that magical tool, we can put it out there, people can get P3 finishes. The difficulty that we have, there is no consistency in concrete, because we have so many different hardnesses of concrete that you have a tool that creates a certain scratch pattern depending on the hardness of the concrete. And that's the difficulty that our contractors have to achieve different types of finishes based on the concrete.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gary, just on that subject that Daniel's talking about, we often refer to our product or our customers, our industry, as being a mobile manufacturing plant, as opposed to Uncle Luigi that you mentioned before, who's got a production line over in Italy and everything comes off in a box and it's pre-finished. Our customers are establishing that finish on site. You mentioned doing samples before, so our customers are, they are trying to, similar to what Daniel's talking about, they're trying to balance this whole issue of we're working with a different material every time and trying to get a consistent result when it comes to a slip test. And these aren't pre-tested and certified in a factory, so the installer knows every time he's pulling one out of the box and putting it down, it complies or doesn't comply in some finishes. But let's just say it's a pre-certified product that does comply. Our customers are trying to reproduce that, duplicate that every time, potentially, if it's another P3 specification. You talked about doing a sample before. I guess from a practical point of view and a cost point of view, if our customers are curious to know, I'm going to do a sample, I need to try and develop some sort of understanding that I'm close to the finish that I need so I can roll this out over the 3,000 square metre supermarket or whatever it happens to be. I don't necessarily need all the paperwork and so forth to go with it just to know I'm on track. What sort of cost would they be looking at just to have a test to check that sample just to make sure that they're in the ballpark, that they're getting a result that they can be confident that they can now roll that out across the whole store, and not get to the end and find out it doesn't comply. Now they've got a situation where they're going to have to try and rectify it somehow.
It'll be a minimal cost. It wouldn't be much at all for a single test. I mean, I've got a lot of clients that I've worked for a number of years that I tend to look after. So if somebody wants help and they want some guidance, well, it'll be a minimal cost. It'll be $250 to $300, something in that vicinity.
Mm-hmm. It's extremely reasonable, and that's certainly not what I would think anyone in our industry would consider a barrier to getting some comfort, particularly if it's we know there's a specification, so we know there's a liability consideration there straight away. So for a few $100, it's definitely money well spent. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Gary, do you service only obviously, because you have to be mostly there to be able to do the test? So which region do you service?
Well, I'm based in Melbourne, metropolitan Melbourne. So the majority of my work's in metropolitan Melbourne. CBD and surrounding suburbs, but I also do go regional. I've got a lot of shopping centres I do in regional areas on an annual basis, so there is a scope to travel regional as well. But the majority of my work keeps me based in Melbourne and the surrounding suburbs.
Yeah, I've got a couple of other questions, Gary. It's probably more anecdotal than anything else, but curious to know what sort of things do you think contribute to the slip rating the most? So you've talked about epoxies before. There are certain products that come out with a certain finish. Like we know vinyl tiles, for instance, they come unsealed in the pack. They're glued down and then they put a water-based acrylic product over the top, which gets burnished and gives the gloss later on. I guess from your experience point of view, what sort of things are you seeing that make the most difference to a slip factor on a particular surface? You've mentioned etching before as well. From my own internal testings, and we've had a lot to do with each other from that point of view over time. We do a lot with impregnating sealers in the concrete, so it's not a topical product. However, we know there are a lot of contractors out there using like microfilm acrylic topical products to achieve a certain aesthetic as well. I certainly have noticed anecdotally, again, within my testing and experimentation, that it's, the difference between an unsealed surface, even with an impregnator, and a sealed one, we can see 10-point differences very, very quickly after and that's not a surface coating by any, that's actually going into the concrete. That's not changing the profile of the actual material. That's just changing its water repellency properties. So just keen to know from because you've been seeing so many different types of surfaces and materials, what are the sorts of things that are having the biggest impact on changing the actual slip rating? And I'm not talking about deterioration over time so much, but I'm just talking about from a manipulation, if I could call it that, of the surface to have significant difference or alteration on the slip coefficient.
I haven't seen a lot with the polished concretes. I've had a little bit of experience with the impregnated sealers and that sort of thing, and they do make a difference. You probably know more than I would. I would assume it would probably have to be a regular, I mean, if it was in a shopping centre environment or a retail environment, it would probably be something that would need to be done regularly over a period of time, not just a one-off and left, I would imagine. Tiles, I have a lot of clients, as I mentioned before, that have tile surfaces that are now getting top-coated with, say, a clear coat and a non-slip grit applied, and chemical etching. Chemical etching is the big one. A lot of people are going down that path at the moment. So, but every surface is different. I mean, vinyl, for example, a lot of people do a cut and polish or change the seal. Concretes, like you said, people are doing impregnated sealers and that sort of thing just to bring the resistance up, which is very popular. But the chemical etching on tiles, and the majority of surfaces are tiles these days, that's the big one. People are going back to chemical etching. So it's there's a lot of options for different surfaces. Every surface is different.
Yeah, the difficulty also for the concrete grinders and polishers enabled for us to get a durable floor, Gary. We have to add something called a densifier that gives us the strength and makes our product durable. And by chemically etching it, we basically breaking some of things down, which makes the floor less durable. And I guess that's the difficulty of concrete polishing.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend a chemical etch on polished concrete. It's not a good look.
No.
Gary, I'm just curious to know, there's a particular finish in our industry that is a version of an etch finish. A lot of people call it a pavilion finish, where it's an acid etch of a concrete. It's usually more of a honed finish for an external environment. Just wondering whether you've come across much of that sort of texture finish in testing?
No, first I've heard of it.
Okay.
I'd be interested to find out more. Maybe
even that's significantly variable, because it depends on how many treatments of etching and so forth it's been given. But yes, it's quite a popular product for external surfaces in our industry, that's for sure.
Okay. It sounds as though you need a NADA certified lab to come and certify.
Well, we're having a pendulum party, so...
Or we need to get the telephone number of that guy that got the same results that you got.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. We can organise that.
Now that we know that you guys get the same result, we're just going to play you off each other for price.
That's it. Yeah, no, we're on the same page.
Hence my question about not needing the paperwork. That's my God.
No, that's it. Yeah, so when I come out, you can. I'll ask for that when I come out next.
Well, the good thing is, like Tim said, he can probably give you a sample tile. Can make it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll address that.
By the way, I know Gary's address, so if anyone wants to make a midnight delivery to him, just put a question in the feed below.
That's fine. No problem.
Yeah.
You have to climb out his front door.
No, that's fine. Just join the club. There'll be plenty more there, so a couple more won't make a difference.
That's right. What a neighbours thing.
Look, there was one stage there I actually had so many tiles left over because I don't get collected. And the neighbour over the road, he was putting a water tank in, and he said, "You got any tiles? I need to put them under my water tank to support the water tank." I said, "Mate, have I got tiles?
I'm your man.
Come round here. Take what you want. Get rid of them." So, he helped himself and got rid of a few. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Gary's pulled up the footpath at the front, all his custom pavers down.
Yeah, that's it. So, no, all good. So, no, it's been really good to come on today and talk to you guys, and hopefully it's made people more aware and educated people. And like I said, pass on my email, mobile number to anybody that requests it, and I'll send through some information as well. You can pass it on. Feel free to pass it on to anyone. And yeah, the advice is free. I'm happy to talk to anyone and lead them in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Gary. It's
no problem at all.
It was a long time coming. I know we've been asking you for a little while now, but we know how busy you were, and we really appreciate you.
Slippery, this guy.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Now we want to thank you, and we appreciate all the information.
No problem at all. Thanks for your time, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Gary.
See you later.
Hey guys.
Bye.
Have a great Friday.
You too.